Catherine, Anthony, and Dr. Bharat?
Yes, ma'am. Present, ma'am.
Okay, so out of five, that means we have three paper presenters. So let's directly begin, and we'll have 8 to 10 minutes of presentation followed by discussion. Will that be okay?
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Since the first presenter is not here as of now, I don't know. They may join us later. So I don't. I really. I directly want to begin with Mr. Akhil Murli, and the paper title is "Rewriting Masculine Representation: Effects of Female Visibility in Association Football." Yeah, is that the title, Akhil?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you have a paper presentation or a PPT?
I have a PPT, ma'am. Do I need to switch the camera on?
No worries. If you want to keep it off, that would also do.
Okay,
So
that's
yeah, you
fine.
may start sharing your screen.
Okay. One second, ma'am. I
Yeah,
was
take your
trying to
time.
present my.
It's okay. It's okay. Take your time. Is there some technical problem? Okay. Okay. Fine. Fine.
Okay. Uh, yes. Uh, Good evening to all of. My name is Akhil. I'm a research scholar at Kannur University, Kerala. The title of my paper is Rewriting Masculine Representation: Effects of Female Visibility in Association Football. Uh, the objective of my paper will be that I'll be making an argument that the increasing invisibility of women in association football has led to a rewriting of sport as a representation of hegemonic masculinity. By association football is popularly known as football or soccer across the world, and it's the most popular sport in the world. Why I have chosen to use football is because, obviously, because of its popularity, and its popularity gives greater scope for study and comparison. And the gender theories I have used is the gender theories of Raven Connell and Michael Messner, uh, using which I'll be making the arguments. Uh, I'll begin with a very brief timeline of women participation in association football. Uh, Even though football is the most popular game in the world, women football is not particularly well known in our country, at least, but it has been gaining popularity across the world. The first women's football match took place in 1892, which was not very long after the first men's football match, which took place in 1872. So it was only 20 years later that the first women's football match took place. And because of the particular socio-economic factors in the late 19th and early decades of the 20th century, women's games started gaining very great popularity. One of the reasons was it was a period of a number of wars. So all the men were enlisted in the war. So the workforce consisted of mostly women. I'm talking about uh, a social background in England. That's where football originated. So it was the women who were who comprised of the workforce in the factories. So and also they replaced not only the men, they replaced the men not only in the factories, but they replaced them also in the leisure activities like football and others. So in the first two decades of the 20th century, women football started gaining more recognition and popularity. And in 1921, by 1921, took place a match where between two women's teams, which was attended by 53,000 people. And in the same year, 1921, the Football Association, which is a government body in England, was threatened by this popularity and banned women's game from being played on any association members' pitches. And the reason that was stated for this ban was that women's game was distasteful. And this ban lasted for 50 years till 1971. Now the next argument is that of or the next uh, topic of uh, that I present in the paper is how hegemonic masculinity is inherent in organized team sports. Uh, Michael Messner, one of the theories I've used, he says in his book Art of Play, critical essays on gender and sport, he says that sport was a male-created homosocial cultural sphere that provided men with psychological separation from perceived feminization of society while also providing dramatic symbolic proof of the natural superiority of men over women. Um, this his definition, and also the how we culturally come to use organized teams, particularly organized team sports. We know that hegemonic masculinity uses organized team sports to further itself or to present itself as very desirable in the society, and where sportsmen they become representatives uh, of a collective masculinity that exhibits all characteristics of the hegemonic models of masculinity, as opposed to varied masculinities that are exhibited by the individual males in daily life. Um, Again, according to Messner, particularly in sports like football, rugby, or boxing, where there's contact between the participants, the jargon used is very similar to one associated with military. The more violent the sport is, uh, the more jargon, the more is the jargon closer to military, and uh, we also know that it is not just the players or the participants that make up a sport. It is also the spectators who become part of the discourse and who make up this. For long, this participation and spectatorship have been uh, male dominated, and therefore the discourse has always been dominated by masculinity. So, what happens when women enter this as players and spectators is that they threaten to encroach spaces of hegemonic masculinity. So, how hegemonic masculinity works in case of football, as in other sports, is that there is a reinforcing of the course. Like uh, hegemonic masculinity uses the male tropes of male footballers to further its cause, and the models as sports persons, particularly in this case where we're examining the footballers, become tropes that are models for people, especially young male or older male, to be aspired to. So a footballer as a working model of masculinity is underlined by his physical capabilities and also by the material wealth that is endowed by the society. So what is of particular interest to us in this modern world is that the social media, advent of social media, has intensified the imagery as visibility has become as visibility has become a reified currency, and hegemonic masculinity uh, uses those values and tropes, especially because we know that sports persons are some of the most followed people on social media, and each of the interactions with their fandom brings in material world or becomes a correct cultural capital. Where women's football, that's how women's football has worked over the years, even in the cases in after social media has become come into force. Often politically intimidated. So, like a model that is that's always different from the hegemonic, that is not hegemonic. Anything that is not hegemonic suffers from uh, prospect of being marginalized. So that's what happens with women's football. So they position on a pedestal, courtesy of an economic system that is fervently at work to incentivize each of their social performance. But women's teams are paid considerably less, even if they are very successful. So what happens here is that the perceived physical prowess that the male physical prowess is greater than the female, irrespective of actual results, along with other social parameters which are conceived by hegemonic masculinity, seem to determine the many things, including what they are getting paid. An example of this would be the United States women's national football team. They are four-time world champions and they are four-time World Cup winners.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, Aditi, you may start with your presentation.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, I will be presenting with my co-author, Apala Vatsa. So we will simultaneously be presenting this
Apala,
presentation.
yes, she is a research scholar from JNU. Yeah, you please go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you, ma'am. So the topic of our research is Raging Female, Contextualizing Women Angst in Bulbul through Butler and Arendt. This paper that we have written is analyzing a movie. So the methodology that we have used is film analysis. And we are going to read the film as a visual text to understand it in terms of representation of female anger and how they are projecting resistance towards established norms. The gendered aspect of passion and anger has been historically traced to Greek literature. It says that to be angry, it has been argued, is to put oneself in the position of judge, which for a woman in a patriarchal society means to be insubordinate. So I would not be wrong here to say that anger and rage expressed by females have been delegitimized throughout the history. The movie depicts the sophisticated interior of a wealthy Bengali manor, as well as the role that women play in these homes. Along with addressing the patriarchal problem, the film also demonstrates how a woman rises up to take charge of her story and extract justice for all the wrongs that have been done to her. Using the theoretical framework of Judith Butler's idea of formation of public and Arndt's conception of appearances, we are going to analyze this movie and understand how easily demands of recognition and rights get categorized as transgressions and how problematically women fighting for space and identity get classified as witches. This movie that we have chosen, Bulbul, is a women-centric movie. The protagonist of the movie, the producer, the writer, all of them are females. The director of the movie is Avnita Dutt. This movie is set in Bengal Presidency. uh, in Bengal Presidency with its gloomy and dim-lit Haveli, it set the mood of gothic genre of this movie. Bulbul sits at an interesting juxtaposition between the real world and on the one hand and that of a fairy tale and fables on the other hand. The movie brought in a world where monsters, ghosts, devils, witches, and spirits coexisted with human characters and had politically fascinating effects on their lives. Here, a word, Vash, and an image of Bichwe conveys it all about a lot of young girls. And this is one of the very initial scenes that was portrayed in the movie. Bulbul is a child bride that arrives in the Thakur family thinking that the life is going to be fun and, playing games with her brother-in-law Satya, who was her own age. But that was not quite the reality. Over the time, the rot in the Haveli began to reveal itself to her. She understood that it's a world of twisted relationships, dysfunctional families, and perversions. The women in the Haveli, not only Bulbul but Vinodini as well, they both are competitors, always in a game of one-upmanship and insinuations, giving it back to each other with wordplay. Here, Bulbul, the protagonist, doesn't balk from showing extreme violence or violation. She has been portrayed as a doll here, and talk of the broken bones there, of reference to falling down the stairs of the house. Bit by bit, all of this hints at the intrinsic oppression and their repercussion pile on and reach the peak in a rousing, powerful monologue by Binodini about Badi Haveli ke Bade Raaz, wherein women of the household might be showered with silk and jewelry, but told to stay silent about secrets. In Femininity and Abjection, Julia Kristeva talks about two common illustrations in horror movie. The first is the image of abjection, foremost of which is the corpse, whole and mutilated, followed by an array of bodily waste such as blood, vomit, saliva, sweat, tears, and purifying flesh. And the second is the concept of the border is central to the construction of the monstrous in the horror film. That which crosses or threatens to cross the border is abject. This is further discussed in this paper, and I would like to invite my co-author to take this forward.
Okay, thank you, Aditi. So then what we have here is the act of going against the norm. In the very act of going against the norm, in the very act of forming a group, the units of that group are transgressing certain important historical as well as contemporary barriers. In the realm of gender, realizations of gender-based violence are important for mainly two reasons. First, it will help us identify the sources of constraint, and secondly, it will also help us understand the modicums of restraint. How is it that restraint is actually something that's permeated across societies and centuries? In this movie, Bulbul, one very important question is thrown at the audience, which is, why is it okay for women to appear in certain ways, but not okay for them to appear in some other ways? When looking at images of dangerous or monstrous or let's say unusual women, we are trained to get shocked. We are trained to get aghast, not just because there is something inherently disturbing about it, but because we are not trained structurally to deal with, to come to terms with images of violent women. The select film showcases female violence, both experienced and perpetuated by females, and this forms the very center of its narrative. If we were to bring in the example of the turned feet, it is the turned feet not just because there has been a kind of a medical emergency with Bulbul, she was not treated properly, but also because it is a very graphic, it is a very concrete kind of turning against the norms. I am not going to be walking down the path that you might have laid for me. Even if it means that I will take 2 steps backwards, I will be using these feet to go in a direction that I feel comfortable in. When we talk about Simone de Beauvoir's concept of the other and the peripheral, what is the other and what is the peripheral here is the idea of women who do not really fit in. And why is it that certain women are not allowed to fit in? Because it causes disturbance at the very core of society. It causes disturbance at the very idea of comfort that our society has problematically found for itself. Now, Aditi, if you could make in the next point, then I'll come back at the conclusion.
Sure, thank you. So, analyzing the movie, in the movie, Bulbul is seen as a threat, not only by her husband Indranil, who was an abuser, but also by Satya, with whom she had a very close relationship when she was in her childhood. Satya went to London for his higher education, and when he came back from London after receiving his education in law, he sees that Bulbul is now taking care of the town and giving judgments as a Thakurayan. On this, he says to Bulbul, "Thakur Thakur khel rahe ho bhabhi." So here he takes this occasion to let Bulbul know her place by telling her not to worry about the town affairs now that he, the man of the house, is back. He tells her that अब हम आ गए हैं भाभी आप आराम कीजिए. Here Buvas point out that the other is constantly on the periphery and never at the center. Hence is perceived as having no agency and always revolving around the dependent or the center in this case, which is male. In the movie, Bulbul is attempting to question the concept of other by pushing towards the center from the periphery, by challenging the authority of the males of the society she is living in and claiming agency of her own. She has decided to move out of her assigned space of victimhood and towards the space where she has agency and authority. After being brutalized by her husband Indranil, the lord of the house, who left her for dead, and then being raped by his younger brother Mahendra, Bulbul came back from dead, quite literally to take her revenge on her brutalizers. She decided to become the messiah of the persecuted and executioner of the brutalizers by first killing her rapist, Mahendra. Thank you.
All right. Just one last point. Bulbul's initiative has helped the survivors move beyond their given narratives of embodiment, both as good and also as raped women. The universe that we've seen in this movie, Bulbul, was initially and somewhat also wrongly categorized as a horror movie. While the genre may not be absolutely accurate, there is some merit in this category. It is, of course, horrifying if a woman decides to stand up for what she believes in, what she thinks to be right, and God forbid, if she decides to fight back against the injustices that she might have suffered. So with this, we'd like to rest our presentation. All questions are welcome. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Apala and Aditi, for presenting such an interesting paper over the movie Bulbul. And of course, if we see the gender trajectories which are projected, they have, of course, placed women transgressing from the established roles. And if you see, just it has come to my mind, like the title Bulbul, Bulbul that we, generally say like it is for a sweet bird, that has been given. And at the end, we see that when she chooses, when she picks up her space, and then she, thought of projecting herself, only then, such other words of, witch trop, etc., that comes to her mind. So, it is, first and foremost that we have seen in all our, gender literature that a woman, or you can say the margins, they have to assert themselves. They have to move towards the center. They will not be given the space, but they have to move by their own. Okay, so this is what, gender literature and, the theorists, they have projected. Thank you for the presentation. Now we move to the next. Yes. Now we move to the next presentation. Is Anjali, are you here?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, so we are going to discuss again a co-authored paper by Anjali Jha, who is a research scholar from Lalit Narayan Mithila University, and Dr. Sanket Kumar Jha, he is assistant professor from the same university. And the topic is quite interesting. It is on the Canadian author Margaret Atwood and the emerging field of fiction, that is climate fiction. So the topic is eco-critical delineation of Margaret Atwood's Oryx and Crake as a climate fiction. So, Anjali, you may start with your presentation.
Okay, ma'am, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening, everyone present here, honorable chairperson, and my fellow participants. I, Anjali, here to present my paper on the topic Eco-Critical Delineation of Margaret Atwood's Oryx and Crake as a Climate Fiction. As we all know that we are now living in a new era, the era of climate change, which is due to the brand new epoch of Anthropocene. To exasperate over this climate change and to decipher its consequences on our present and future generations, a new genre of English novel came into vogue in the 21st century, popularly known as climate fiction or cliffy. This genre often comprises scientific fiction and utopian or dystopian themes, envisioning the impacts of climate change on anthropocentric ambience and how it is affecting human beings, flora and fauna. Currently, because of climate change, the permafrost is melting, glaciers disappearing, and sea ice receding. Atwood even talks about the disappearance of the permafrost. The northern permafrost melted and the vast tundra bubbled with methane. Margaret Atwood called climate change the everything change. All her works deal with the environmental crisis, dystopian context, and speculative intent. Oryx and Crake is a fictional novel that portrays a world where overconsuming and environmental negligence has led to the destruction of ecosystems and the species which live within. The proposed paper seeks how Atwood depicts the misuse of knowledge and technology in her novels. It further studies the impact of scientific advancements such as genetically modified crops and lethal microbes on human existence. Margaret Atwood is the most noticeable female writer in Canada. She has been renowned since long for her assessment of wilderness and ecological issues. The crux of her fictional works primarily concerns women's existence, nationalized individuality of Canada, and ecological catastrophe owing to the expansion of science and technology. In her novel Oryx and Crake, she portrays a doomsday of human beings where the entire mankind was destroyed due to the misuse of genetic engineering. The causes of the crisis reflected in the novel are human manipulation of nature, egoism, and malfunctions of belief. By exhibiting the horrible scenes that might happen in the future, Atwood arouses the ecological consciousness in the readers, leading them to think about the way to avoid the destruction path in the fiction. As Atwood wrote this work, Oryx and Crake, she drew from recent affairs headlines regarding issues like ecological disaster, genetic engineering, and bioterrorism. The novel deals with the contemporary issues like worldwide warming, genetic engineering, declining resources, scarce species, sexploitation, and a wearing down of kindness. At the end of the 21st century, the possibilities and dangers of biotechnology was a hot subject. Research conducted during the 21st century led to a number of revolutionary discoveries, and science took huge steps when it came to altering various aspects of living organisms, such as their DNA and the way they reproduce. In Oryx and Crake, author's observation is the abuse of science and technology and man's egotistical brain power have merely created newer traditions to enchain and ultimately end mankind. The ethical dilemma of how far one can go in the name of science is very much present in this novel, but it also raises questions about humanity's place in the world. It argues that the novel describes the end of Anthropocene and the Quakers, who are genetically bioengineered humans, represent a non-threatening post-human species. The novel describes the impact that humanity has had on the earth in the novel and all life that inhabits it, and how it has led to an imminent ecological crisis due to humanity's greed and sense of exceptionality. Oryx and Crake situate itself in the contemporary view of eco-criticism, which has attempted to consider how literature can sway ecosystem in very real ways. Atwood expresses her worry over the widening disparity, increasing starvation and dearth, deformation of the assets of the budding and weak nations, and the enormous ecological dilapidation caused by commercial globalism. Especially, she voices her anxiety over the perils posed by the gene rush and the brunt of biotechnology as it brutally upsets the environment. Atwood's future society in Oryx and Crake is divided into two parts, compounds and pleblands. The former are isolated places where the highly qualified scientists and technicians and their families study, live and work, similar to enterprise in life today. The latter is despised by compound society as dirty, backward, and ignorant. The setting for Oryx and Crake is a futuristic wasteland set after the collapse of the global ecosystem. The protagonist and narrator, Snowman, survives the human-made global plague and may reside alone in the world's ruins. Snowman is likely humankind's only survival. Humans spliced together some genes of different species and created such living beings as pigeons, wolfhogs, raccoons, gnats, spots, and various spliced plants. They felt they were creating animals just as God had done, but some of their creations were too dangerous and had to be destroyed. Genetic technology becomes something dangerous in Atwood's commercialized environment with genetic products exposing the absurdity of genetic splicing. Conclusion. This study analyzes the connotations of environmental apocalypticism in Atwood's novel Oryx and Crake, reflecting on the theme of future environmental disasters by focusing on the following: disasters from industrial technology, absurdities of genetic engineering, economic madness and political chaos, and problems of overpopulation. The one-sided emphasis on the positive effects of technology and the technological development of human civilization without considering ecological integrity will cause irredeemable environmental disasters. Through the environmental apocalyptic warning, this study clarifies the connotations of environmental apocalypticism in and out of the text, helping readers to understand the possibility and severity of environmental apocalyptic denouement and developing consciousness of environmental crisis, which is practically significant. Oryx and Crake is not merely a literary work for the enjoyment for readers. It contains deep philosophies revealing Atwood's concerns about nature, systems, and the planet. Atwood's environmental concern is fully expressed in this work, which has sounded the alarm for humans to protect the environment. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Anjali, for presenting over this theme. And of course, if we go about the Margaret Atwood's writings, they talk about the environment, they talk about, you can say, the surfacing of the mind. And of course, along with the time, we have seen such, scientific advancements, their, environment, that has not been, taken care of. So, of course, we do not know exactly that whether it is a science fiction or exactly the realism that she is going to talk about, and eco-critical concerns are have been at the part of Canadian writing, so she opens up about it. And uh, now we move to the next presentation. Let me come to the details. Yes, the last presentation in the session is by Miss Vidushi Pathak. She is a research scholar from Lovely Professional University. The topic of our presentation is speculating family history in Kim Scott's Benang from the Heart.
Good evening,
Yes,
ma'am.
Vidushi. Hi, good evening.
May I start
Vidushi,
with
you
my
may start.
presentation?
Yes, you may start with your presentation.
So my paper entitled as Speculating Family History in Kim Scott's Film from the Heart. So the paper explores the family history through a reading of the indigenous writer Kim Scott's 1999 novel The Man from the Heart. It aims to recreate the practices of Noongar family over the courses of the 20th century, as it tends to be a historical fiction in which the work of writing history involving a reckoning with family histories of writing, which is much more grounded as the content of the history itself. Talking about the Kim Scott is an Australian novelist of Aboriginal Australian ancestry. He's a descendant of the Noongar people of Western Australia. Well, he has written 5 novels and children's book, had poetry and short stories, which has been published in the range of anthologies. Talking about his novel The Man, he won Miles Franklin Award by the in for the novel The Man from the Heart, and the main context of the novel deals with the process of reading out the color. So this was a process in which children were forcibly removed from their homes and assimilated into the white Australian society. These children were forced to breed with white Australians in order to lessen the appearance of the Aboriginal in them. And it was believed that through this continuous process that eventually there would be no trace of Aboriginal in the future generations. Also, the chief protector of Aboriginal Western Australia, Leo Neville, was a key player in the process, and he believed that it would definitely work. This process occurred due to government inability to classify mixed children for the government system, as well as their fear of what mixing would do for the society. It is about the fourth culture assimilation, finding how one can return to their own culture, and how it also presents that how it is difficult to form a working history of a population who had been historically uprooted from their past. It talks about the Nan follows the main protagonist of the novel, who is Harley, a young man who has gone through this process, which is breeding out the color as he pieces documentation such as photographs and his grandfather notes, as well as the memories and the experience of the various people who are in Noongar community. Also, Harley and his own family have undergone a process of colonial scientific experimentation, as I have told, which is called as the breeding of the color, which ultimately separated individuals from their indigenous Australian families and origins. So Harley described himself as the first white man born. Why he was the first white man born? Because through his story he describes himself that he is the only one, the first born successfully white man in the family line. Because when he at the age of 7, he goes to live with his grandfather, who runs a boarding house mainly inhabited by alcoholic men. So here only he has been raised, and he has been raised by his grandfather, where he is raised to carry one heritage, and he is supposed to ignore his own lineage, his own culture, and his own community, which is Mumbai. But as teenager, he begins to reconsider that who he is and who I am. Like in the novel we quoted, reconsider who I am. Uh, so in that search of self, Harley comes to slowly understand his family in the family line, the product of long and considered process to create a white man from a long line of people with Aboriginal blood. And this process has been overseen by his grandfather as a part of bold and disturbing scientific experiment in which he has been trying to breed out the Aboriginal blood in successive generations in order to achieve biological and social absorption to dilute the strain and to uplift a despised race. So his efforts mirrored those of the settlements and missions in the early part of the 20th century, in which Australia operated a crude system of appellate design to separate white from blacks. Also, the Nang is a blending of fact and fiction, as the narrative is littered with real life archival documents from the chief protector of Aborigines, A.O. Neville, who presided over a misguided and cruel policy of culture assimilation, culminating in removal of Aboriginal children from their families to be raised as white, and the factual content, which stand on its own and is not editorialized or commented upon, serves to make fictional storyline more compelling and I must say that heart-rending. Although the Scott, who is of Aboriginal ancestry himself, so refrains from judgment that it would be the coldest of the readers who did not understand the deep pain, sadness, and sheer immortality of the story which has been presented in the Demand from the Heart. So to conclude my paper, I must say that Tim Scott, through his novel, as he himself belongs to the Noongar community, so through a Demand from the Heart, he's trying to reinterpret the history of his own people. Like he wanted to reinterpret the past of his own people through this fiction, and by through the main character of Harley, he presented the history which has been uprooted from so long. So this is all about my paper. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Vidushi, for opening about this post-colonial context where we have this aboriginal literature. And of course, it's not only of this country where we are just searching for the self-identification to this plurality. Of course, it is the case with all the nations which have been the colonies. And of course, you can talk about same in context of India as well. So of course, we expect for a pluralistic society where if I club, the margins, that can move to the center, because I'm using this word because it is comprising all the issues that we have discussed so far. So already we are late with 40 minutes. So I would like to conclude this session. So in this particular session, we had five papers. The very first with Rizwana, who has talked about human rights perspective and where menstrual framework that has been taken into consideration. And of course, the second paper that was by Baiju Thomas, where he has talked about integrating digital storytelling with the this teachers for English language learning. So in the same, we had third paper by just a second. Third paper by, yes, Aditya Gupta and Apala Words, which was related to gender issue, where you can say the female anger and race that is projected with reference to the movie Bulbul. Then we had another paper, again co-authored paper by Anjali Chai and Dr. Sanket, related to Canadian writings, where the eco-critical concerns have been discussed. And the last paper where we have talked about, great novelist, Australian novelist Kim Scott, where he has talked about family history as well as, you can say, the abortions. So if I go, with the theme, because it is going to be a conference on, literature, humanities, etc. So this session, it combined all these aspects, and I'm grateful to all the organizers of this conference from St. John's College and Cape Comorin Trust. And we would like to end with it because already, we are running short of the time. So thank you for providing me this opportunity to be part of this academic exercise.